machines are there, of course law is there. And just imagine someone saying tomorrow in Brussels, oh, and by the way, if you have a company running cabs, by law there have to be two drivers on cab. Boom. There's a boom of jobs. Now, I'm not saying it's a solution, I'm not saying I'm happy to take it into account, but the pie, the threshold, and the law. Any forecast about jobs, you need to take that into account, or it's just a game. Now, having said that, it is scary. Those are the statistics, old stuff, and I took it from The Economist just to do a bit of history about the American market. Most of the jobs in green stuff, the bioware disappearing, most of the stuff in the hardware, if you get that, kind of stable, and the software exponential. Since the machines there are sharing the space with us in the infosphere, they do software, well, clearly we have a problem. But what kind of problem? I just wanted to check one statistic at the moment here. And you don't have to read anything. You just have to look at the V thing. Those are the number of jobs in the United States in the car industry, of how many people are employed building cars. Now, if you look down here, it says 2000. Ever since, has been growing. Now, it doesn't take a logician to realize that this is happening while we've been talking about automation taking jobs away. And the car industry in the United States is one of the most heavily automated, roboticized industries in the world. So how do you square this? Well, then you speak to the CEO at Audi and he tells you, yeah, so it's fine, of course, but for every computer or every robot we introduce, we have to hire a human being. So at some point, whatever reason you get down that line, you start introducing robots and computers, and guess what? You have to hire people. So I'm not picturing a rosy thing here. Trust me, I'm a philosopher, so pessimism comes with a job. You don't go anywhere with a PhD without, if you're not looking dark side of it. And yet, you know, people have to be realist. So what are the real jobs at stake here? Most of our jobs today are interfaces. The gentleman there, his job is gone, and it's gone a long time ago. Do you really need someone pushing buttons for you on the elevator? I don't think so. But remember, who is pushing the buttons now? You are. Oh, thank you, technology. The job of the lady might also go, because of course she's an interface between a GPS and a car, and that is a waste of a human brain, okay? And that's the full stop. The job of the gentleman there is there to stay for as long as we had that kind of car, because we made a mistake. A long time ago, we thought that it required a human brain. The most amazing thing the universe has ever seen so far, apocalypse, Stanley, and pick up the pump, put it in, and put it back. And that is only a human being. There's no monkey, there's no robot or nothing. If you are in a startup business, please just build something that does that for me, because it's amazing. I mean, the gentleman has his job for life, unless, no, we replace cars. And you speak to the electric car people, and what they're doing, oh, you're plugging it? No. We know better. Make sure that the charging will be automatic. Otherwise, not plenty of jobs for people taking and putting. Well, since we are human faces, these interfaces are also going, but they're coming back. I mean, a lot of displacement of jobs means that we will do more things. DIY is the thing that you do at the supermarket. The lady may not have a job, but I am the one now that scans the beans. Thank you, technology again. But in all this scenario, there's plenty of other interfaces happening where humans will be necessary. We grow with the building. As a child, I thought, how can you build a skyscraper with those things down there? And then someone explained to me, it's like, Luciano, we build a skyscraper by being on top of it. And that's how we lead with technology. We are on top of it. And as it grows, so do you. So in this case, there will be plenty of interfaces to take care of. Now, there are some problems in all this business. The infosphere machines there with us, stupid, yes, we intelligent, we adapt to them, we do. They're not going to do everything for us, true, but some interfaces will go, true. It's a mixed bag, remember, the pie, the threshold, and the law. Issues, well, some issues are there. Dependency, those who live by the digit will die by the digit. We should really think more carefully about the redundancy and the resilience of our systems. There's plenty of jobs in the industry. We do not have enough people in whatever security you want to call over there. And it's not just cybersecurity, not just terrorism. Allocation responsibility. I mean, lawyers never had it so good, honestly. And I just have to go to Brussels, the GDPR, and I don't have to spell that for you, that's the wrong place where to say what that is, has generated a whole set of new issues. I'm not necessarily happy about it, but surely responsibility will be a place where increasingly we'll have more need for humans. Unless someone in Brussels get it wrong and start talking about electronic persons. You know, I know that you know, but that idea is a silly idea. Better make sure that whatever happens for their job, if their job causes problems, someone somewhere is responsible. Don't stop at the machine. Not even the Romans used to stop at the slaves. They knew better. They were looking for the owner. Or they would put the slave on the cross, but they would also put on the cross also the owner of the slave if anything was going wrong. So going on, the democratization of AI and all this machine learning will be in the pocket of everyone, and I'm talking about the ordinary stuff, the Siri, Nest kind of ordinary stuff, not Hollywood. But once it's in any pocket, support for human agency, that's what IBM does a lot, regularly. They don't talk about AI, they talk about cognitive computing, they're very smart, because they know that they want to do the augmented intelligence, etc. There will be plenty of that. And again, that is a mixed picture, it's complicated, and I'm not sure how it's going to pan out. But surely, jobs going, that's not that simple. Environmental impact of AI. There's an amazing amount of jobs there. We just started a new program with Digital Catapult here with the government, looking at startups, and they are exactly working in that context. More jobs, more ideas, more wealth created. In this case, AI for sustainability, that's a good join. So green and blue policies here join forces. Well, that might be the future of our economy. An economy of experiences, not of building things, but of improving how you relate to the world. Green economy, very welcome. Management of complexity. Those are the numbers of people living in bigger and bigger and bigger cities, London included. Those are incredibly, massively complicated systems to handle. There, AI for social good, not necessarily super smart, but just a little bit less dumb sort of cities, that will generate a lot of jobs. I mean, just look at Rio de Janeiro, Barcelona, London a little bit. Those are places where that's where the jobs are in demand. There are three kinds of innovations, as you know. You invent something, the wheel. You discover something, you go to America. Or you design something. Every society has lived in one or the other way. But today, if you think of it, of these three ways of going forward in innovation, design is really what makes a difference. Not that invention and discovery are not important, but it's still, no, pressure is on designing new mechanisms that will provide the right environment for the future generations. Now in that sense, and I'm coming to the end of my 15 minutes in your childish moment, here are just 6 points to stress. Disruption. We should really look carefully not at how fast, how deep, but how fast this is happening. If you were so deep but slow, we would be able to adapt. It's because it's so deep and so fast that it makes a difference, which leads me to the impact. The present cost will be balanced by future advantages and benefits, but the future benefits will be there for another generation. So minimizing the impact today, because we, the current generation, is going to pay for it, and the future will take advantage of it, it seems to be fair, just reasonable. And if you see this in any sort of more continental Europe, more perhaps Nordic, Swedish way, that's exactly what I mean. You know, a world that takes care of people who will suffer from this transition is going to be massive, very fast, no time to adapt. And yet, it will generate a lot of fruit in the future. So why not taking care of the current generation as we speak? The benefit, there's a little bit of twist there. Something like a universal basic capital, capital, a little loan to your average citizen. Because billions, I didn't say million, billions of people have lived and died to bring us here. Generations and generations and generations. They suffer, they work, and we are grateful, meaning there's a bit for everyone. A capital is something that you give to someone to try, to give them a chance to take risks. It's not like a free gift, it's not a lottery ticket. It's like, well, just because you're a British citizen, we'll give you, £10,000 to try something. That's it, that's the only way. And if you're successful, you give me the money back. If you're unsuccessful, okay, there was really an income anyway, but no, we thought it was lost. And inequality, taxation is the T word that you don't want to use, but at some point we'll have to discuss this. Skills, languages. Don't listen to anyone, including a Davos, who start telling you about soft this, soft that. You must be kidding. This is a complicated, engineered world. You really want to transform everybody into someone who watches Netflix all the time? I don't think so. I'm scared as a university professor to hear anyone says, oh, we don't need people with maths, biology, chemistry, computer science. Well, if at any stage of human history, we need someone who actually knows something. This is the stage. So the languages of information, and by this I mean not just coding, not just your first language, I mean your second language, music, the language of vision. Anything that, if you don't have it, the entry in Wikipedia will be beyond you. You do not get it. Well, that is what we need to teach to our students and to the next generation. They will then be in charge of what is available. And to conclude, so what should we do here? And that's a bit of a philosophical ending. I think we should think deeper. We're not thinking deeply enough. And this is probably the wrong place where to say this. No, after all, I've been invited. So if you invite a philosopher, you expect the thinking. But in general, you can think that we're doing first and then we're trying to repair afterwards. Beta testing, hat on the other side, that's over. You have, say, 2 billion people on your platform, you want to be careful. So think deeper, design better. This is the age of design. We need to make sure that we design the infrastructure, the social rules, for which the future will be grateful to us. They will look back and say, thank you, that was a great opportunity, you took it, as opposed to what they may say now. And be mindful, and I didn't say careful. Careful is the timid, is the precaution. It says, I'd rather not do it. Mindful means I have a pile of data, for example. I'm a bank, I should use it, because that's going to be useful for society. Take some risks, mindfully, not necessarily avoiding risk just in case, because that's what we're doing at the moment. Opportunity costs are staggering as we speak. With that, if you have to remember anything from this 15 minutes of childish moment, the real challenge is no longer technological innovation. We landed on that planet. There's going to be fantastic stuff, but we landed. What we do with that planet, the digital, the infosphere, that's the challenge. The governance of digital is the real challenge, and as we know, we don't want to face it. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Without further ado, I'm just going to hand straight over to Linda to kick us off for the next thing. Thank you so much, Luciana. Lots to think about. I don't know if it's positive or not, but there we go.
Thank you. Thank you, and what a pleasure to start with a philosopher. That really was an extraordinary overview of some of the key issues, and I just wanted to say straight away how much I agree with what you're saying. I wanted actually to start with a tiny bit of history. 5 years ago, I ran actually the first session I had run at Davos on artificial intelligence with a whole bunch of professors from Berkeley who at that stage were working on AI. And there was a whole bunch of media there, one of whom was from the Telegraph, and the next day, and I think I tweeted it at the time, the Telegraph had this incredible picture with robots come to kill the world. And actually, I think that's 5 years ago, that's how we sort of saw it. We saw that we saw robots, as Luciano, as you say, as something very negative, something we need to be worried about. And since that 5 years, over the time of the 5 years, I've been watching the impact of a number of trends, including technology on work. I run the Future of Work Consortium, which is now 10 years old. And we have 50 companies from around the world engage in a conversation about what will the future be. And I wanted just to say a few things about that and also relate it to what we heard at Davos this year. Well, the first thing to say, of course, about Davos this year is I don't think there was a single prime minister who didn't name check technology or artificial intelligence. And in fact, our own dear Theresa May, after she'd very quickly gone over Brexit, spent most of the time speaking indeed about this technology and reminding us that London is indeed the centre for artificial intelligence. Those in California were slightly surprised by that, but she was, of course, looking at really one of the great resources that we have here in London, which is DeepMind, and indeed Cambridge University and Oxford, but the technology people tend to be at Cambridge. So this is an extraordinary cluster, and I think, but also Macron spoke of it, and indeed did Trudeau. So it's clear that this is a topic that everybody is now talking about. Where are we in terms of impact on jobs? And I think I'd have to say, I write with an economist, And I think the general view is that economists have got it wrong, and I think your point was absolutely right, that when we started talking 5 years ago about massive job destruction, and I'm speaking specifically about the Frey and Osborne work, we completely underestimated that actually a job is made up of many tasks. And actually what will happen, hi Jonathan, is that tasks will go, but not necessarily whole jobs. So we've been slightly blindsided by the fact we actually don't really know, A, what's going to happen in terms of job loss, and B, where the new jobs are being created. And I think actually listening to you, I felt the same about how you saw the world. You know, the jobs that you see are being created, it's not absolutely clear what those are. But certainly we know that some of them will be low-skill work, particularly in service economies. People are saying, you know, robotics will look after your mum, but actually it's really only Japan where people feel comfortable about robots looking after them. Most of the world don't. So there will be the creation of large numbers of low-skill jobs, and the RSA report was really great on describing that. But actually the high-skill jobs that are going to be created require, as you described, very high cognitive skills. And it was interesting, and I was reminded of this by a Nobel Prize winner at Davos this year, that if you take a look at the pastimes of Nobel Prize winners, they are much more likely to have music and art as part of their pastime than non-Nobel Prize winners. So this combination, and I also heard from the president of Yale, you'll love this, the president of Yale, that one of their most loved programs these days is a module that's called Physics plus Dance. You heard that from me. Physics, yeah, he wrote, I knew it'll be in tomorrow's FT, I knew, I've already got that one down, but it's amazing. So here we have a world where we're interested in AI and technology. We know it's going to impact on skills, we're not sure exactly how, but nevertheless there's a great deal of disquiet. And I think for me the best way of describing that would be, you know, Jimmy, who's a truck driver in America right now. And actually in many ways, when I teach my own classes at London Business School about this, that would be the person I would start with. In fact, I have that as one of my essay questions, you know, what should Jimmy do? And I think that's really the problem and the challenge. And I want to just say, just briefly, something about what people are saying about what Jimmy should do. Okay, let's first of all talk about the transition that Jimmy is going to go through. I think the point you made about this being a major transition has been pretty much agreed this year. I haven't really seen that before, but I think this year at Davos was the year when everyone said we are in a major transition, which the world has never seen before. Generally, the historians will stand up and say, hang on, what about the Industrial Revolution? People are now saying, as you've said, it's faster, and it's more global than anything that the Industrial Revolution created. And so there are a whole group of people who are going to be left behind, and the numbers are very large. So what would Jimmy and so many other people like him do? Well, the first is that he has to make a transition. So that means immediately education has to change. Education historically has looked at the first years of life as the major point of resource. But actually that's no use for him at all, because he now has to be re-educated. And how does he do that? And the question of who pays for that is a fundamental problem. I'm on the committee of the council that Abe formed in Japan on the future of Japan. And we've got very interesting statistics there about the amount of money that companies are spending on reskilling their own employees. You probably think that the amount has gone up. In fact, it's gone down. So actually, because as you move from lifetime employment, a company quite rightly says, well, why would I bother reskilling somebody when I don't know what they're going to do, whether they're going to stay with me. So the question of who pays is a really big one. Should government pay? I get the feeling that universal basic income is not something that's going to work. And it's interesting that you didn't use the word income.
Capital.
You used capital, and I think that's a much more sensible idea. I've certainly never been supportive of it because it takes away the notion of work as a good, as an individual good and as a public good. I was at a very interesting session at Cambridge last year with one of the Cambridge philosophers, and one of the points that he made is we know what it's like not to work. It's called unemployment. You know, we know what it is to be unemployed. It means your social capital decreases. It means your identity goes. So I think good work is absolutely crucial. And so imagining that simply giving people money when their job goes, I don't think sufficient. But it does make sense, and I absolutely agree with you, that the public purse will probably have to provide monies for individuals. Some countries are already doing that. Who are they? It's just the normal countries that you would imagine. You know, the country with the best civil service in the world, which is Singapore. The country with the best sort of social structures in the world, Denmark, Sweden. So, and they were all there, by the way, the ministers of all those countries, and indeed the Prime Minister of Denmark was there talking about what they're going to do. So there are countries that are actually already doing that. Singapore already gives a proportion of money to each of its citizens to allow them to reskill. We have to do that. That means, of course, we also have to change the notions of lifetime education. I'm a professor at a business school, and I'm the first one to say that education has been terrible at reimagining a lifetime of education. We've been really, really poor at it. And I think, and rightly so, we will be disintermediated, and we'll be disintermediated by people like Jonathan, who I can see here, Jonathan Knight, who runs a company that does simulation-based learning. You know, that's how we will learn in the future. Technology will provide an option, and you will see right now that technology giants are putting billions of money into developing online learning and different simulated ways of learning. So lifetime education is crucial. Basic income is crucial. But let me just say something else about what we have to do, which is clearer roadmaps. You see, part of the problem that Jimmy, I think I called him, the truck driver has, is he doesn't know what to do next. And one of the things that we've done at the World Economic Forum, and if you're not linked into it, I would really suggest you take a look at the recent reports that came out last week from the council that I'm a steward of, which looked at job loss, education and gender. And one of the things that we've done is to try and build pathways for how people could transform their skills to new jobs. And we have some of those pathways, and they were published last week. But as one of my colleagues said when we looked at these pathways, well, how do you know that next job is not also going to go? So I think we've got to be absolutely clear that telling people to reskill when we don't know what the jobs are going to be in the future is a very difficult ask of them. And so I think collectively, governments and research institutes need to do a great deal more work on this. There are countries that are already doing that. France has put quite a lot of money into trying to understand that. And some individual companies have. The two that are name-checked a lot at the moment are AT&T and Westpac, both of which have provided quite good navigatory tools for their employees to help them move from one type of work to another. I want to just finish really by just briefly mentioning what we might do in terms of moving forward. I'm extremely concerned, and I blogged about this yesterday. I do a Davos blog every year, and my blog came out yesterday. I'm very concerned about the lack of action on this. I mean, we have known for more than a decade, well, you probably knew a great deal longer than that the job market was going to be very vulnerable. We knew who the vulnerable people were because we were pretty clear about where automation and augmentation would make a difference. We knew what tasks were going to go, and yet we've done so little about that. Governments have been very poor. It's extremely difficult to get any focus in the UK government on this issue. There are others who are doing more, but I don't think we're doing enough in the UK. In fact, I'm absolutely sure we're not. So we need to increase the level of public debate about this challenge. This is a transitional period, and we've only got a certain amount of time to do something about this. What might that be? Well, I think it comes pretty clear from what I've said before. First, we need partnerships. We need governments, educators, and corporations to work together. And at the WEF, there are a whole set of partnerships that are now being built where countries are putting themselves forward as being pathfinders in this, and they're working with corporations in those countries to make a difference. Every single country needs to do that, and they need to do it really quickly. So governments, educators, and corporations need to take the initiative. Secondly, we need a proper public debate about basic income and how we're going to support those people in transition. And of course, that's also a conversation about taxation. We need to invest in learning that will help people make the transition. And we need to build better roadmaps of how people can move from the jobs they're doing now to the jobs that they're doing in the future. Last year when I blogged about Davos, I really said that inequality was the big issue that people were speaking about. Because remember, January last year was Brexit and Trump. So people were very worried about, about how social discontent would create these sort of outcomes. With, and of course you'll hear this later from Martin later on, with 2% growth and 3% growth predicted in most economies, and the IMF, Christine talked quite a bit about that on Friday afternoon, I don't think that was on the agenda anymore. I'm being sort of pretty, I'm saying that, so truthfully, I just didn't see inequality on the agenda. I think people were pleased to have growth and felt that, when one boat rises, all boats rise. There isn't any evidence of that. All the research that we do on longevity, technology, and social trends shows that most of the trends that we are experiencing in the world right now increase inequality. They don't decrease them. And I think that this issue of how we help people to make the transition from jobs that no longer exist or will no longer exist will be one of the major challenges that we as a generation will be judged by. Thanks very much.
If you would like to carry out Jonas, Linda, if you go here,
yeah.
Luciana, if you go at the end, Fraser, Nicola, or crack on. Thank you so much, both of you, for absolutely fascinating discussions. Thanks. Just to kick us off on some of those big questions that both of you outlined, and we'll come to the more practical side of things in particular as we go on. But one of the things that you both highlighted very, I think, succinctly is that we're in a pretty profound paradigm shift. So the very structures around how we think about this are changing. And while one thing I want to be clear on from both of you is, are you optimistic that we, by that I mean individuals, leaders, companies, governments, are we actually asking the right questions? And Linda, maybe you could start with this, because obviously you're at Davos. Did you get a sense from last year to this year that actually people are engaging with the really important questions rather than the binary conversation about technology all bad or technology all good?
Yes, I did feel that. I mean, I think that the substance of the conversation has become a great deal deeper. And I think that rather than saying, as we did 5 years ago, will it be job loss? I think everybody now assumes that there will be major job loss. I don't think anyone disagrees with that now. So the question is really an action-based question, which is both an action-based question and a stakeholder question. The action-based question is, how do we move fast enough? And the stakeholder question is, who gets involved in what? I was just saying to my colleagues earlier that I was on loads of panels actually on AI and job loss, and one of them I was sitting next to a guy and his big claim to fame was that he had transitioned people who were working who were driving truck drivers into the next job. And I said, that's absolutely amazing, great to hear it. I'm going to write that down immediately. How many have you transitioned? 15, he said. I thought, blimey, we've got a long way to go. So actually that's part of the problem. It's just not big. I mean, the numbers are huge. And so it's not digits, it's not even hundreds, it's not thousands, it's tens of thousands, it's millions. And that the scaling of it is what worries me. I think there's lots of experiments taking place, but the scale just isn't large enough yet.
Luciano, a philosopher, you ask questions. Yeah. What do you think to that question? Are we asking the right questions, or do you still think there's a bit of reticence to really grapple with it?
I think we're asking the right questions. So is that shall we say, not the lack of optimism, but the presence of some frustration in, to quote what you just said, the pace at which we are addressing them.
Yeah.
In other words, the point is not that there's a lack of intelligence in the world as we speak. I mean, the world has never seen so much intelligent people, so many educated people, and you can fill this room easily with a bunch of Nobel laureates anytime. And there is also a lot of goodwill. We forget this. But just because goodwill is totally disenchanted with politics, it doesn't mean that it's not massively out there. Just look at the numbers of people who volunteer their time for free to do things for the world. It's staggering and mounting. So goodwill is there, intelligence is there. So what is lacking here is the political strategy and planning. Now, I will avoid any reference, by all means, to anything that is contemporary in this country. However, if we could spend just a tenth of that span of attention to fix what is really not quite working as we speak, then we could move forward. So the frustration for the pace at which we are sort of slowly addressing things. So optimism, we will get there. We should get there much faster, as you said, way faster.
Fraser, let me come to you, because you advise companies actually doing some of the stuff on the ground, and you're talking at that senior level. And again, Nicola will give us some good examples and insights as to how this is manifesting itself. How do you change companies to embrace that against presumably some resistance? Fraser, what are you seeing from the business leaders you're dealing with and working with? Are they asking the right questions, and are they coming up with answers that they are satisfied with and their workforces are?
Our sleeves are well and truly rolled up today, I'm pleased to say. I think there is a huge optimism. We're beyond the fear, and I think people are now looking for the pragmatic, practical ways in which AI and machine learning are actually going to have an impact. So the work that I spend my time doing is actually building systems, many of them experimental systems, to actually change the tasks that people do. And I think it's to build on Linda's point. If we take a task-based perspective, and this is the great work the OECD have done, we take a task-based perspective, not a role-based perspective, there are no roles going to disappear. There's about 4 or 5% if you do it. 40% of the tasks that people do today could be replaced by technology that exists today. But that's 40% of the tasks, that's about 4 or 5% of roles. So what we're seeing is organizations roll their sleeves up, bring their people with them and saying, look at your role and where can we make your role more interesting by taking away the tasks that are the mundane and the repeatable, because these unintelligent machines can do a much better job than you. You know, if only, back in Minsky's time, if only they'd called it augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, we wouldn't be having any of this problem. Because what we're doing every day is helping scientists and engineers and manufacturing organizations and service businesses to use really simple technology, really simple machine. In fact, don't tell them how simple it is, because otherwise, use really simple machine learning technologies to make roles different, really, rather than take them away.
I mean, just before I come to you, Nicola, I mean, just take a survey of the crowd. I mean, how many of you feel you're optimistic about what all these technologies portend? And how many of you are frankly a bit freaked out and don't quite know what's actually really happening and the implications of what's happening? You're right. Okay, cool. Nicola, what's your experience of kind of putting some of these ideas into practice running a big company like yours?
So I work primarily in the contact centre arena. I'm sure there's lots of applause and warmth coming back and from the audience. It's actually really weird because I started my job in BT back in 1990. Obviously I was only 6 at the time, but I'm a psychologist by background, and I always say a psychologist interested in technology always gets very obsessed with things like artificial intelligence, and I agree. I actually had a conversation with Marvin Minsky about how stupid the term artificial intelligence was. He didn't really give me a lot back, but you know, I prefer augmented intelligence. So my first job was programming a neural network to support a contact centre in 1990.
A neural network being, just explain what that is for people.
So, all right, so a neural network effectively is, it's a learning system, effectively. So it's trying to mimic the neurons of the brain. So we did a very basic system back in the 1990s. And I keep saying, working on actually almost identical things today, a few things have changed and a few things haven't. So the first things that really has impacted in this space is sheer processing power. So in the 90s, we did not have a great deal of processing power. We have immense processing power now. In the 90s, we did not also have a lot of data. And I keep saying we now have a lot of data and also deep learning systems. Deep learning in the 1990s was me with a notepad, frankly, going around and annotating the neural network and certainly programming the neural network. Now we have vast amounts of data and we can apply other things other than neural networks. We have a lot of statistical work going on in this particular area as well. And statistical analysis depends on the vast data set. So instantly, the first real lesson is this is only as intelligent as the data you give it. So frankly, I work in the chatbot area. You can have the best natural language processing and recognition tool at the front end, but unless you have data at the back end, it's so dumb. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to think about is it's about the data now. So what data do we have? It's complicated slightly by the lovely GDPR regulations coming in, where actually we will now, if we're applying machine learning to any data set, if it's customers' data set, we have to get their consent to use it. And that then gets into a very complex conversation with the customer going, well, we're going to use this data to do this with a machine learning system. And that, again, I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation in the next few months with our customers to say, will you let me use your data, because actually it will be good either for you, and I call this the me economy. As a customer, I'm quite happy to share my data if I get something back. I think when you look at things like intelligent virtual assistants, that could become my digital butler, but actually it needs a lot of information about me in order to become effective. And I need to be able to be confident to agree, I'm happy to give you that information. And actually I got tweeted today, somebody sent the terms and conditions about interactive televisions to me. And within those terms and conditions, it basically said, we will listen to every conversation you have in front of this television. Say yes to that, because you will get access to a lot of services. So there's some interesting conversations I think we're going to have with our customers, but effectively a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, it's not about job loss, it's very much about augmenting tasks that come into the contact centre. The good thing is it takes away the boring stuff, and actually then the challenge is we've got to educate our frontline staff to be able to deal with the inevitable complexity that's coming at them, the emotive stuff, and it also, the human brain is a remarkable thing. I absolutely agree that the human brain can do stuff like having a conversation. Chit chat is very difficult. Chatbots are actually very bad at chat, ironically. So they don't do small talk, because small talk is actually a social thing. It's a human thing, and we're quite good at it. It's quite difficult to teach a machine. But things like intuition, my neural network back in the 90s, I was looking at fault diagnosis. That's easy, isn't it? There's a decision tree there. And then you get to a really, really sophisticated engineer and you go, how did you come to the conclusion that it was that rather than that as the fault? And they go, gut feeling. Damn it, how do I put that in a neural network? So gut feeling, that's something that we can't really duplicate in technological sense. Things like negotiation, that's social and emotional, very difficult to do solely with a machine. So I think I like the augmentation piece, and we're seeing it in the contact centre. We take away the dull and the dirty stuff and the dangerous stuff, actually, in other fields, not in contact centres, but the dull stuff that really doesn't imply that you have to engage your brain. But it then means that your agents, your frontline agents, the last thing you want them to do is behave like robots. You want them to engage their brain. And I think that's, again, upskilling is very important in the contact center industry as we put more automation in.
That's an interesting point, because one of the phrases you used, Linda, which I thought was very revealing, was the idea of good work. And it goes to Luciano's stat about the nature of jobs in the car industry, which is, one of the, as you say, one of the most automated, particularly in the US. How do we get to a point where, not everyone can be PhDs. Not everyone's going to be that. Obviously, that feels, well, only Luciano and Linda. And Nicola. But that question, you seem to pin something. It's going to replace lots of jobs at the lower end. It's going to lead to better work. How do we get from point A to point B? You talked about some of the education things, you talked about partnerships. In practical terms, Linda, what are you seeing on the ground which gives you confidence that we can make that migration, that transition?
Well, I think right now there's lots of experiments, and we're writing those up. So if anybody in the audience is doing something in their corporation, please tell us, and we'd be very pleased to write that up as a case. So there are examples, and I'm sure that BT is spending more money than it used to on reskilling. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Is that true? Yeah.
It's very true, particularly in the contact centre space. Actually,
Well, so that's great. So there are lots of experiments going on, both at the level of corporations and at the level of governments. It just isn't joined up, and it's not fast enough. So I think that's the issue really. It's the joining up, and I have to say, Fraser, although it was just absolutely marvellous to hear you saying about how corporations were changing the tasks that people do and making them more interested in getting those people involved in redesigning the task. We actually haven't seen much experience of that. So
if this is a fourth industrial revolution,
Yeah.
we need a concurrent revolution in training and education to build on your
We
point,
do,
Linda. We
yeah.
don't stop learning when
Yeah.
we're 20.
yeah.
And this is the responsibility of governments and enterprises alike, really,
Yeah.
and education institutions. I'm paying a 1% apprenticeship levy. I don't know anybody else is paying an apprenticeship levy. Why can't we exploit things like that to make it an obligation and an opportunity for enterprises to be continuing to build the skills of their people and for them to have that obligation to their people?
Luciano.
I just wanted to add, agreeing with all has been said, two small footnotes. One, having a job is not identical to working. Having a job means having a salary, and it's because you don't get a salary that not having a job is a problem. We need to be clear about this. It's the salary behind the job that is the problem. Having something to do, engaging, taking pride in what you do, well, that is also, for example, the whole world of volunteering, or the whole world of people who go back on Sunday and they do their gardening, and anything else.
The whole world of caring for your children.
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's what we do. I mean, we take care, we take pride in what we do, etc. So once we get this point obvious, trivial, but reminder in place, we need to remember that the whole sort of discourse on the future of work, etc., is a very postmodern right now thing. You just read Jane Austen. No one wants to have a job there. I mean, if you have a job, and then they work like so people work. No, mechanical people are what Shakespeare describes the pure Romans in Julius Caesar. A new mechanical people, people with a job. No, we move forward, despite the Oxford philosopher, we move forward from that idea. But being paid to do something without taking pleasure in what you do, taking pride, being happy, doing a good job, to mix up the terminology, that's what we're talking also, I'm not minimizing, but also about. Because when you're told, yes, you will have that job, why? Because legislation will make sure that you have that job. But look, you're just a robot. We could replace you anytime for half the price. Have a job. That's not really the world we want to live in. So I think part of the problem, and just as if we didn't have enough problem, is how do we make sure that this culture of working is a culture of pride and interest in the small task. The right thing done properly, as opposed to, I need money at the end of the day, which is, trust me, important. Everybody has a mortgage.
Well, that's a delightful theory. I don't know if reality, unfortunately, necessarily relates to that. And one other thing I wanted to bring up, picking off of that, was another theme that came out a lot at Davos this year, or speech, that certainly resonated a lot beyond the mountains, was George Soros. Every year he makes an annual speech. At a dinner, he says his view on the world, which generates a lot of attention. And this year, he had two guns blazing at essentially the technology sector, particularly Facebook and Google, which he argued are essentially dual monopolies of 80% of the world's digital advertising. They control many things, and saying this is a fundamental danger for democracy and economies. And while they will speak of being part of the public good, in fact, their primary motivation is private profit. Linda, you talked about this idea of partnerships and between educators, companies, and governments.
Yeah.
When a topic like this, so I think part of the anxiety, and actually, despite the optimism here, I think outside of this room, there's a lot of anxiety around this stuff, more than perhaps most of us in this room feel because of the nature of the positions that we occupy. A big anxiety is the nature of the private companies that seem to dominate a lot of these spheres. So the amount of data they have, the amount of processing power. One reason DeepMind sold itself to Google, DeepMind was a UK startup around AI, sold us up to Google for about $500 million, which is a massive They got a steal there because basically they're doing extraordinary stuff. And one of the reasons was simply the processing power that Google afforded them to do some of these crazy experiments was to a degree that they just couldn't match anywhere else. In that context, how do we talk about what these partnerships actually mean when inevitably these companies' first priority, because of the nature of the capitalist world we live in, is to their shareholders, their employees? Where does that partnership thing work out in that kind of world?
I think I don't know the answer to that, but I think the question that you raise, Ravi, is absolutely at the centre of all of this. That actually what we're asking corporations to do is to think in the long term, to think about their employees' well-being and their training over the next decade, because really that's the period of time that most people want to plan, or even 5 years. Most of us would like to plan our lives in the next 5 years. And yet it's very difficult for organizations to do that. And I don't think that any of the major tech giants have really done enough. I mean, we've actually done an analysis of some of what their initiatives are, but they're just not large enough given the size of the revenues that are flowing through them. And so where the government plays a role there, you spoke about the apprenticeship levy, and actually one of the sub conversations about work at Davos was apprenticeships, and a deep feeling that education has failed, particularly people who didn't particularly want to be educated and were sort of forced into an education that didn't work for them. And actually we should take the German model and think much more about apprenticeships. And quite a lot of the ministers I spoke to were either about to launch that or had launched it. So there's an example where government have stepped in and asked organisations to pay a levy, which are then used in a public good, in this case to support apprentices. But whether they should do more, I don't know. And even if the money is raised by government, do we know that it's going to be raised for the right thing? I'm always quite interested in the work of the Indian IT sector, and I'm thinking here of Wipro, Tata Consulting Services, and Infosys, who have for some years now partnered with each other to increase the level of IT skills within India at the size of millions rather than at the size of 15 or 20. So they have done that, and they've done that by building curricula, creating programs, and training teachers. And I think that's what I wrote a book called actually, what was it called?
So many books.
Oh, The Key. Nobody read it. Sadly, did you read it? Yeah, thank you. And it was about what corporations could do to the world. And I sort of started off with a preface that said, it was a love letter to corporations saying, I think you need to step up. And actually the FT reviewer, I'm sure it wasn't you, Abby, just sort of said, oh, for God's sake, Linda, stop drinking the Kool-Aid. Corporations are there to make money, but I've always thought that corporations could and should do a great deal more. I think that work is, one of the most amazing things that any one of us can do, and corporations are the context in which that takes place. And they have to take responsibility for the lives of their workers. But I agree with you that the sort of pressure they're under to deliver quarterly results, the Aspen Institute, of course, is the one that speaks most about that, makes it very difficult for them to do that. So that's why actually often family-held firms are the ones that do most on this.
Before I throw out to the audience to you for questions, Luciana, very quickly, because I know you have a policy advisory role as well as you've talked a lot about work with big tech companies. I mean, to that answer about the role of those companies when the private sphere is controlling some of the biggest changes, they don't necessarily have the public good in front of mind. How do you see that partnership model evolving, and how that might relate to individual employees?
Well, I think that I agree entirely with what Linda said, that it is the way forward at the moment. To the extent that I'm not quite sure we have an alternative. I mean, join forces is a very 21st century idea, because until recently politics has always been accountable, we vote, transparency, etc., whatever that kind of democratic perspective. Companies are not that way, therefore companies do not do politics officially, but they do plenty of lobbying anyway. So all of a sudden you discuss with, and disclaimer, no, I do quite a lot of work with, not for, my dad says I must be the only one doing pro bono with Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and IBM at the moment. Takes a philosopher not to be paid by those guys. But in those contexts, what we're discussing is something like to have a label that I sell around is this good corporate citizenship, which is more than just pay your dues, employ people, do some training, maybe open a school for the kids or recreation. No, it's being an agent in society for good. Now, the good news, at least it might be the people I meet, I don't know, but the good news is that there's a lot of appetite for that. The bad news is that, and this is the comparison with the supermarket and the plastic bags, there's a clear sense that this has to be taken as a step by the whole sector. Remember, no one was going to charge for that plastic bag unless everybody did. Once everybody did, everybody was happy. The supermarkets and ourselves. It was a step up. So unless we raise and we help them to raise the bar and say, at this stage, you guys are the digital agents of the world, are so powerful, they're called multinational for a reason, everywhere. Well, we can all work together, but politics has to help them to help themselves, so to speak. Right. And until you expect Facebook to cut its own throat to make sure that Google is unreasonable. They are rational agents as a block. So to me, that is the special play at the moment. There's a goodwill, but that goodwill is not being enacted because there are no general rules that enable that goodwill to sort of surface. It's a click away, metaphorically. If we could make that click happen, then we would be there.
Right. Good. Well, let's open the conversation away from the stage to you in the audience. There's a lady with a microphone, and I'd be grateful if you just let us know who you are and where you're from.
Baltimore is kind of from April Capital. Now, I'm actually happy with the enthusiasm that you had, but one of the speeches in Davos was Harari's speech, and that about artificial intelligence, and that was pretty dark. And I felt that all your conversations actually presupposes a very robust democracy at the back of all this. What happens when it's not? How does that work?
Is there anyone in particular you wanted to address that question to?
I think perhaps Linda was the most optimistic, so I'll ask her.
Okay.
And she works with the government so closely. So.
And actually that speech was the one that I think resonated most, actually. He really caught people's attention. I don't particularly have a view about that. I think that in fact I'm going to hand it straight over.
Yeah.
I mean, I could give you a superficial response, but I suspect that's not what you want. So I'm going to hand it over to our philosopher. I did write a book about democracy, actually.
Yeah, there you go.
It was
What was it called?
No.
Oh, you nasty.
The Democratic Enterprise.
Nice.
Luciana.
Look, I think there is no point in being pessimistic because that's really unhelpful. In other words, looking at the dark side. Well, thank you so much. Anyone with a decent brain can see how things can go wrong easily. It's very hard to run uphill, and that's what we're doing here. We're running uphill with stuff on our shoulders. So anyone says, "Oh, it's going to be," thank you. Especially if we keep things going this way. So the alternative to robust democracy is precisely, if I may say so, fully the point that we're making here in terms of cooperation between the good forces. Okay. At the moment, we have a couple of problems. One, we still think that politics and business are, shall we say, playing a game of football. I mean, they respect each other, but it's a kind of I win, you lose sort of moment. No, zero sum. It is not, and it cannot be, and it shouldn't be. But that's 21st century, because it has been in the past. So, number one, join forces. Two, join big forces. Because the only big forces at the moment that can make a democratic difference are, and I'm so sorry to get into this Brexit business, are really, really large international forces, whether you like them or not. So if you have a European Union with those shoulders, they can talk to Apple, Facebook, Google, and so on, to China, and being heard. You're a small country in the middle of nowhere, less so. So joining forces politically, joining forces with the good side, then we have a chance. Now, it's going to be hard work. No one says, oh, this is a piece of cake. But the third point, if I may, and the last one, is we Europeans, all Europeans, and I'm talking about the continent, we've done the worst possible things to this planet you can imagine. We're really responsible for some of the worst possible things ever. So we have not much to blame other people. A couple of world wars, that's enough. So in that respect, we have lost the faith in leading. We need to regain that. Precisely because we made those mistakes. We know better. We made such disasters here that now we know what looks like. And we can not teach a lesson, but lead by showing the way. So if we could do these two things, good forces together, not against each other, more global, and leading by example, then we would be in good shape. And if you want to live in China, you're welcome.
I was going to say, actually, one interesting example, and I think to answer your question, actually, China is a country to watch.
Wow.
Yes.
So one of the biggest trends we follow at the FT is China, but also tech in China. You have these companies there which are more pervasive than anything we've spoken about in terms of Facebook, Google, Twitter, whatever, that are seeped into the lives of a country in a way that we can't even appreciate. And yet, the relationship with the state is much deeper than, again, any of those companies would be with their relevant governments.
And
I think there's an interesting challenge about that, because a lot of those companies, one of the questions they have is whether any of them can actually go global in the same way, beyond just listing overseas. Can they become massive businesses in their own right, making tons of profits from the US or Europe in the same way as they do in China? The jury, I think, for some of them is still out. So it'll be interesting to see in that context whether that may answer your question.
I was just saying actually that that's exactly the point that Macron made about the Chinese IT sector.
Right.
Yeah. And the way that they were using data in a way that you would not see outside of
And
China.
it's the data regulation bit that makes a huge difference. The regulation in China about data versus the regulation in Europe is very different. And based on what I said before, AI is only as good as its data, and if you have a big data set, that's why the Googles and the Facebooks of the world are winning this war, because they have massive data sets. It's all about the data. So your data regulation is going to have a huge impact on how much progress AI has in terms of transforming what we do. And obviously there's lots of ethical considerations, lots of security considerations, and very much privacy implications around that.
When you say winning the war, what is that? What do you
The
mean?
data war.
The data war.
Yeah, it's the quality of the data, the inputs that go into the system.
It's garbage in, garbage out where data is concerned.
I wonder if one of the reasons it's difficult to answer your question is because we operate in a Western democratic frame of mind, and we rely, to Luciano's analogy about the weather, we rely on expectation about legislation to come along, and yet absolutely China and Russia's targeting of the US election was based on very simple machine learning algorithms to identify relatively small sets of people to whom they could target misinformation and influence the election. We have to expect that that's going to continue. We don't actually know what's going on in China, but we do know there's enormous investment, and the scale is much, much greater than we're seeing in the West.
The lady at the front, if you could. Sorry, come to you. There's a microphone just coming. And just one last final example on China. An interesting example of technology and data use is that there used to be the situation, there was a washroom or a bathroom in the Forbidden City. People used to go and often steal the loo rolls, but they installed a kind of facial recognition system so that when you go in, it recognizes you, and as a result, you can't steal the loo rolls. Part of the reason is the amount of data they can collect on you and actually implement is of a whole different scale than probably we think is acceptable, even though it might be being used here. But that was a simple example of where you can see how far China is ahead of us in some ways.
Yes, good afternoon. Jean Gom. I'm here with my Harvard Business School Alumni Club hat on today. Linda came and talked to the Harvard Business School Alumni Club yesterday, and having listened on her 100-year life and to what you've been saying today, I'm drawing a quite different conclusion. The conclusion I'm drawing is I better watch out for myself individually.
Yes.
And I better start managing my life in all sorts of ways, including my learning curve, in a quite different way. Because so far, big business, and I'm a Harvard Business School alumni, big business and government don't fill me with confidence that they're actually going to be able to do much for me as an individual. And having reached that sort of conclusion, I've just thrown a whole new light for me on what is happening politically, with individual people saying, enough, no more, this is not how it's going to be. I don't know quite where I would go with that, but it's a different conclusion from what you're drawing there, that we need more legislation, we need more cooperation between big companies, governments need to get their act together. Are you sure? Is that really the way?
Can I put that to Nicola? Yeah. I'm sorry, Nicola, but partly because you're running a business, you're actually an executive in a company probably grappling with some of those questions. I mean, is that something that the individualistic instinct which this world's creating? Is that something that's coming to you? And are you, to our questioner's point, as a company doing enough to really facilitate a slightly different thing which we're talking about?
I must admit, I haven't really thought about it that way, but
That's why you have great questions.
I mean, the advantage, certainly, if you're talking about AI, again, it's all about data, and if it's an individual, you only have an individual's worth of data. You can't do any neural networks or statistical analysis on one piece of data. You need a big data set. So in terms of what certainly we do in the innovation space in BT, is we know we can't do it on our own. So we do look around and partner with both large and small businesses, actually. We do a lot with startups to try and say, well, we can't do this on our own because we don't have the capabilities. We do need scale, particularly when you're looking at things like machine learning and AI to make it work. So that's the reason for the critical mass. But I absolutely get from an individual's perspective, this can feel a bit, I guess, a bit scary.
Linda wanted to come in on that as well.
Well, I just wanted to say, I mean, Jean, I absolutely agree with you that there's a really important question about the level of agency. It's interesting, Andrew Scott and I have written 2 books together. One was The 100-Year Life, and the other was a book that we've now finished writing but won't be out yet. And in both books, we actually we wrote the book for an individual, and we said this is what you need to do. And actually we did that because when I've tried to write books for governments, as I've done before, or for corporations, they sort of get lost, really. It's very difficult to know what to do. And so what we've done, particularly in this book, Less Than the Last, is we have a chapter at the end that says you need to manage your agency and influence corporate and government policy. And that's actually, so we actually started from the individual and said, and this is what you should be saying to governments, and this is what you should be saying to corporations. But of course that leads aside. So what will happen when that book is reviewed, as indeed happened when 100-Year Life was reviewed, was that people said, but you're only speaking for the elite, because it's only the elite who can manage their agency. And of course that's a very important part, and that's really the challenge with inequality. The challenge with inequality, Jean, is that we can all manage ourselves. I dedicated one of my books about the future to my 2 children, one of whom is now learning to be, is now almost, on the road to being a surgeon, and the other one is in a consulting practice. I didn't really need to dedicate a book to that. I mean, they could work it out themselves. That's not really the challenge. We can all, I think, manage ourselves perfectly well, and we can manage our children perfectly well. That's not the issue. The issue of agency is what happens to the guy who's a truck driver. That's what I keep going back to, because it's saying to them, it's your problem as an individual, sort it out, isn't really a helpful thing to say. And that's where governments have to step in, and it's when corporations have to step in. And I agree, and thank you so much for coming in on that point on democracy, that actually it has to be a combination of all of those things. And one of the issues that we've talked about at Davos for many years is climate change. And that really shows a huge failure in terms of how governments and corporations work together. And there is a question at the moment: is would we fail again? Would we as a world fail again to bring agency across those different partnerships to make a difference? I feel much more optimistic about this one than I do about climate change. But nevertheless, the amount of effort that will have to be put in and goodwill is of a substantially higher nature than we've seen currently.
We have time for literally one more question. I'm very sorry, that gentleman asked. Actually, give me, come on. I'm going to have 2 questions. Give me that gentleman first, and then this lady at the front, please.
Probably
We'll do them 2 at the same time, if that's all right. And I'd be grateful to give you quite quickly. We actually overgone
very good question. And following on what's been said previously, I was one of the guys who actually raised hands when I was asked whether. Sorry.
You need some water.
Yeah.
I have the same problem at the moment. I'll give you mine, except I'm good at
I'll come
others.
back.
Do it. Let this lady at the front ask. He had his hand up, so he must come back.
Just to pick up on what Jean was saying, is there a role now for technology to actually solve its own problem and disintermediate government? And how do you create a distributed system that channels that intelligence and goodwill, of which there is a huge amount of pent-up capacity in the world, and actually just create platforms that lift up those that don't have capacity for agency or don't have the privilege of agency, and can the problem become the solution, and are we actually looking to the wrong entities for a solution?
Yeah.
And I'd like to address that to the whole panel, and especially the China.
Great question.
Yeah, Luciana, why don't you, if you could quickly answer, then we'll get the mic back to you.
That's a very good point. I spoke about that mistaken view about AI as being a marriage when in fact it's a divorce. And I think, say, for example, technology and direct democracy, we think that is finally the possibility of divorce when in fact we should be having a marriage here. In this case, in other words, making sure that public opinion is able to have a much bigger role in terms of informing and sort of, guiding politics rather than what we have had so far. I will be very reluctant, for reasons not to be even scratched today, in terms of anything that looks like direct democracy. There is a reason why the ownership of power is separated from the use of power. That is the structural nature of any democracy. Otherwise, you have some kind of dictatorship at some point, that being even a dictatorship of majority. So those two things have to be kept separate, governance from sovereignty. But apart from these details, the point that technology can help to have a better democracy is crucial. And I think that links very well with the previous question, where I agree. If you have the kind of discussion we have had today, you had two ways forward. You have the if, then that's what's going to happen, more individualism, more detachment of the technological world from politics, more social projects on our side, which are not politically embedded. Or you have not what if then is going to happen, but if that should happen. And the difference between is going to happen and what should happen is magic, is the design. It's not like this just keeps rolling and that's when it's going to end, but more like I don't like where it's going to go. And therefore, I push it in the other way. The other way being not just an individualistic project, which is one of the two legs, but also a social project together with the individualistic project. And technology for democracy inside the political debate, not outside, building out something external, thinking that if we have a social project of our own in the civil society, job done. No, because meanwhile politics will suffer, and we are witnessing this everywhere. Trump, Brexit, whatever happens in Europe, Merkel, Italian elections, God knows, etc. That is the detachment of the social from the political. The political becomes really fragile. So we have to re-put it back. Technology can help, and individualism is only one of the two legs. We need the other one.
We literally have very little time, but in like 15 seconds.
And it was literally a follow-up on those comments made just now. I do wonder, if we don't have any time anymore, and we're currently living in a world where about a third of the electorate in Europe is sort of right-leaning, which is, I think, unprecedented for the last 80 or 90 years. So politics are really going away and cater more to the ones who are left behind, and create policies in that direction. Who, in the short term, is going to be leading an effort towards a better world where you describe it? Where is it the corporations leading, who are slightly confused because, in my case, I'm employing 25, 26-year-old people to tell me what it is my business ought to be doing in 3 years' time? Or is it the politicians? It's the politicians, the political class, who needs to take a lead, albeit in a situation where they're somewhat conflicted because they don't quite know where they need to be leading. There's a tremendous amount of confusion in a world which has to, according to what you say, has to act very quickly.
Well, at every major junction in society, like every major industrial revolution, we have turned to the philosophers to guide us and help us understand the impact of what's happening. And that may be a bit flippant, but actually it does come back to education, because it's all of our responsibility, and the more that we can do to inspire people to love learning and want to be part of addressing these challenges, the better, really. So it is the philosopher's
The other
job.
thing is that because we also have a lot more data that we can base our decisions on, I keep saying if we can use these kind of systems to navigate the vast amount of data about what citizens think, what they want, all of that kind of thing, that's tactical. But actually the strategic part is around, we actually need the human brain to figure out what to do with that data and where to go with that data. Well, that's the other thing that certainly, if you look at the kind of jobs that are evolving out of the AI space, you've got your trainers. So actually, the data isn't neutral. We give it the data. So actually, how do we use people to train this to get the right answer? There are a whole load of things that it will take too long to go into around. Do you trust the people training it? But then you've got sustainers who are effectively looking at the data and trying to make sure it's ethical, because again, data isn't neutral. We supply the data, so there are biases within it. Are we making decisions based on either false data, fake news, or have we introduced some kind of human bias within that data? We need people to spot that. And then we also need the explainers, because effectively AI is a black box. It learns. You don't program it, certainly in traditional sort of neural networks. It learns from data. They're like babies, they learn stuff. But they're also like babies in that they're a black box. You can't actually see what they've learned and how they've learnt it. So we need probably at the moment people with a lot of PhDs to try and unpick how it learnt what it learnt. Now, we don't want to necessarily have people with lots of PhDs doing that, and a lot of the I know certainly a number of the big people in AI and machine learning now are trying to say, how do we provide tools that you don't need 2 PhDs to figure out how it got to that conclusion. So we're involved in this process. It's not the machine's running off on its own. Treat AI like a baby, and make sure that we give it good data and we quality control it and make sure it's ethical. All of those we need to do for it to actually work well with us.
Okay, on that note, I'm afraid I'm going to sum up and close off the discussion. The idea of AI as a good baby is a term I hadn't written down as one we could take away. Agency, partnership, augmented versus artificial intelligence, and this idea of transition is obviously key. We're all in it. We don't know what it means, but hopefully these 4 have offered you a bit of guidance. I encourage you to buy their books, watch their videos online, and read them in the FT, of course. Thank you again very much for your lovely questions.
So much to Raji and our wonderful panel for sharing your perspectives. Our next session is going to be on global economy. Those people who have already registered, please do come back. And we're going to have afternoon tea now downstairs on the ground floor. So you just take the lifts and go down to the ground floor, press 0. And those who have not registered, they're most welcome to actually watch it from the low ground floor from the bar where we have live streaming. But the next session is going to start at 4 o'clock. So please come back at 10 to 4. Thank you.
It will be very optimistic.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.